Okay, welcome back to lab number 2 on creating a WebLogic domain. In this lab, you're going to learn how to use a variety of tools to create and deploy domains. The first one that we're going to use is the configuration wizard, which is a WebLogic user interface tool for creating WebLogic domains. Let's go ahead and launch the configuration wizard. The script is going to be located under Oracle Home. Oracle Common, Common Bin. And the name of the script is config.sh if you're on Linux, and on Windows it would just be config.command. All right, let's move that here. Okay, so on the create domain page, let's go ahead and check the radio button for create a new domain. This is the default option here. We can also use this tool to update an existing domain by extending it. In this case, let's go ahead and create a new domain. Now, the domain location needs to be, for the purposes of this lab, the domain root that you defined earlier during lab 1. So the domain root is simply labhome/domains. So I'm going to go ahead and delete a portion of this directory location. So it looks like the following. And let's call our domain demo domain. Once you've done that, go ahead and click next. The next page displays a series of templates that you can base your domain off of. If you take a look under available templates, you'll see that there's a base WebLogic server domain template and a series of other templates that define pre-configured WebLogic domains for specific functions. So we have some domain templates that support JAX RPC and standard JAX web services, one domain template that includes coherence, and another one that includes SOAP JMS extensions. Just because we select one template doesn't mean that we are excluding ourselves from having access to certain functionality. We can create a basic domain from a base domain template and then build on top of that. So whatever you pick here doesn't necessarily mean you're stuck with those features. You can always add or delete these features afterwards. But for the purposes of this lab, let's go ahead and pick the basic WebLogic server domain and click next. All right, so throughout all the lab exercises, and I may have mentioned this before, our username is going to be WebLogic and our password will be WebLogic123. This is a very important page. So a domain can be created to run in either a development mode or production mode. Development mode differs from production mode in that in development mode, domain and application security works a little bit differently than it does in production mode. There's a notion of an auto-deploy directory, or you can copy files to this directory and WebLogic will pull that directory and automatically deploy applications to the admin server. That feature is not available in production mode. Another big difference is that in development mode, you have to define username and passwords in a file called boot.properties in order to start up WebLogic servers. In production mode, that feature is locked down and credentials to start a server are passed using a different mechanism. So for the purposes of this lab, let's go ahead and select development mode. And under JDK, make sure that the JDK 7 that you installed earlier shows up here. If not, you will have to browse for it and specify it under the other JDK location option. So once you've done that, go ahead and click next. So on this page, under advanced configuration, you can modify the settings for the admin server, node manager, and manage servers, clusters, and coherence. For this lab, we're just going to take the default settings and not modify anything at this point. Go ahead and click next. What you're seeing here is simply the summary page that just identifies what resources are being configured, and we are only creating an admin server at this point. I'll go ahead and click on admin server. You can see the default settings for this admin server, the listen address, the listen port, and the server name. So go ahead and click create to create the domain. This should go by pretty quick. Once you see the domain created successfully message here at the bottom, go ahead and click next. And this is an important page too. So take a look at the domain location. This tells you where the domain was actually created. We specify this at the beginning of the configuration wizard. And then that admin server URL is the URL that you'll use to log into the admin console. And the admin console, if you don't know, is used to manage your WebLogic domain. You can create resources, servers, deploy applications, perform monitoring and diagnostics. So just jot down the URL here. The way we have this set up right now is the admin server will respond to requests on any available address. It will respond to localhost, the machine's IP address, 127.0.0.1, and including any local domain. So on my computer's domain name is bugatti.local, and it will respond to that as well. So go ahead and click Finish. Let's verify that our domain was created. So go ahead and navigate to the lab home /domains and do a listing in here. Now you should see 4 domains in here. Demo domain is the domain we just created. MedRec Spring, and WL Server were created when we ran the Quick Start wizard during Lab 1. Let's take a peek inside demo domain for a second. Do a listing in here. Now during the lecture I talked about the various directories that were within the domain home. So the domain home is the main directory for a domain. And inside the domain home you'll have the config directory, which contains all the configuration files for the domain. The bin directory, which contains all the shell scripts for controlling server lifecycle, so startup and shutdown, node manager, even the service and server migration scripts. So let's go ahead and take a look at the config directory for a second. Under config, we have additional directories, obviously. So inside the config directory, the most important file here is the config.xml. This file is the heart of a WebLogic domain's configuration. So if you view this file, you can see that there's quite a bit of XML in here. And if you feel free to browse through and take a look at the various different XML elements and their values. So we have the domain name, and much of this stuff may seem Greek to you now, but we'll touch on some of the stuff throughout the remainder of the labs. So scroll down until you find a server definition. This XML element here defines the admin server that we created using the configuration wizard. You can see that the listen address is empty, which means that it will listen to any address that it can bind to. Go ahead and exit the file. Let's take a look at the bin directory. So as I mentioned earlier, all the startup and shutdown scripts are in the bin directory. This is where you'll start the admin server, shut it down, and start any managed servers as well. One important file in here that you should be aware of is the set domain env script. This script defines all the environment settings, environment variables, and libraries that WebLogic needs to run. So I'm just going to scroll through here. You can peruse this if you'd like. But if you need to add or adjust environment variables such as class paths or Java JVM arguments, you can do that in this file. And I like to put them at the very end. So I scroll down to the very end of this file. I'll just jump down to the bottom here like this. I like to define any type of extra Java options here. This is just an example. So, and we'll touch on this later on in the lab. Let's go ahead and exit. Okay, so now what we want to do, now that we've created our domain, let's go ahead and run the domain template builder to create a template from this domain. Let's assume that you had created this domain and you had performed all sorts of configurations. You added servers, you configured resources such as data sources and JMS servers, and you wanted to save this domain so that you can use it in other environments, or you want to use it in development and you're constantly tearing down the domain and rebuilding it scorched earth style. You can use the domain template builder to build a template from this domain, which is essentially an image of the domain that you can then use to quickly deploy a WebLogic domain without having to go through the configuration wizard or using the admin console to recreate the domain from scratch every time. So to launch the domain template builder, we have to go back to Oracle Home. Under Oracle Common, bin and do a listing in here, and there should be a script. Oh, wrong directory. And take that back. So under Oracle Home, WL Server, Common Bin, do a listing in here, and you'll see the config builder script. So go ahead and run this. Okay, so once the domain template builder window pops up, we want to create a domain template. So make sure the create domain template option is selected, and then we want to make sure that the use domain as source is selected too. So under source location, go ahead and type in the name of the domain that we just created, which is demo domain. And then template location, we don't want to stick it all the way down there. Let's go ahead and put it under lab home. And get rid of templates here. And let's give the name of the template something a little more descriptive. We'll call it demo template.jar. Go ahead and click next. Okay, and so on the template information page, we have the name of the template, the version, author, category, description. Let's just accept the defaults here and hit next. So on the domain content page, what you're looking at here is the file system on your computer, and on the right-hand side is the contents of the template. If you have files that you need that are not part of the WebLogic domain, such as, let's say you have got database initialization scripts, or you have custom shell scripts, you can add them to your template. I have nothing to add today, so we're going to leave the defaults and click next. The scripts and files page allows you to do parameter substitution or variable substitution. So if you've got scripts, let's say the start WebLogic script here, I'm going to click on this guy and click edit. You can do parameter and variable substitution. So taking a look at the start WebLogic script, you can see that the value for domain home is parameterized. WebLogic, when you create a domain from a template, WebLogic will substitute in real values for the parameters. And this one file is an example of that. Now, if you can have custom scripts that you've added here, you can do the same thing. You can insert a variety of variables in your scripts if you need to. So let's accept the defaults here. We're not going to do anything special, and click next. And this is simply our summary page. So if we click on admin server, we can see this is very similar to the configuration wizard. We haven't changed the listen address, the port is the same, and the server name is the same, which is what we want. Go ahead and click create to create the template. Once you see the template creation successful message, you are done. So go ahead and click next. And it reminds you of where you specify the template location, and click finish. So let's go back to lab home and do a listing in here, and there you should see the demo template jar. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a domain from this demo template jar. And we're not going to use the configuration wizard. We certainly could. When you launch the configuration wizard, there is an option to create a domain from an existing template, but I want to show you how you can use WebLogic scripting tool to script domain creation using a template. So WebLogic scripting tool, and there's a lab later on in the course that will dive into WebLogic scripting tool in much greater detail. So for this lab, I'm not going to do a deep dive on WebLogic scripting tool. Let me just say that we're going to launch WLST in an interactive mode. So let's go ahead and do that now. WLST is located under Oracle Home, WL Server, Common Bin. Whoop, forgot to add the CD in here. I'm And under common bin, do a listing in here, you're going to see a script named wlst.sh. So go ahead and invoke that. And what this is going to do, it's going to launch an interactive shell for WebLogic scripting tool. What you can do here now is a variety of administrative functions, and one of them is that you can create a domain. So to understand the syntax for WebLogic scripting tool and the commands that are available, you can always type help, and help will tell you what, at a high level, commands are available. I would also recommend taking a look at the references section in this lab guide. It will point you to a WebLogic scripting tool reference that is a great resource for understanding what commands are available for creating and managing domains. So the command that we're going to use to create a domain from a template is the create domain command. If you type help, and everything in, by the way, WLST is based on Python, so if you're familiar with Python syntax, then learning WLST is pretty simple. So as I was saying, the command that we're going to use is create domain, and we can get help on just about any command within WebLogic when we type help and then in case in single quotes create domain. So what help is fantastic. It'll give you the syntax for the command and then give you an example of that command. So you can see here that the create domain command takes 4 parameters: domain template, which is the location of the template that we created, domain dir, which is where we want to create the domain, and username and password, which are the username and password for accessing and starting the admin server. So let's go ahead and create our domain using the template that we just created. So we're going to type create domain and then input our parameters. Now domain template, we put that under lab home, or in my case U01 Udemy. The name of the template was demo template.jar, and domain dir. Let's put this under our domain root directory, which is U01 Udemy domains, and let's call this template domain. And for the username and password, let's continue using the defaults that we have been using: WebLogic and WebLogic123 for the password. Go ahead and hit enter, and WebLogic will create the domain. Now if you get no output back, that means the command returned successfully and created the domain. So to verify this, let's go ahead and exit WebLogic scripting tool by typing exit with a pair of parentheses, hit enter, and let's go take a look at the domain directory and see what's there. So back under our domain root, we'll do a listing, and there should be a directory in here named template domain, and there is. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Oh, looks like the domain is here. Let's go under config and take a look at the config.xml, and then search for the server XML element. And here it is. Here's our admin server. No address to find. That's fine. Yep. Looks like it worked. And that's it for this lab. So to summarize, you learned how to create a domain using the configuration wizard. You then created a domain template from that domain using the template builder. We then used that template to create another domain, but this time we scripted the domain creation using a single command: create domain. Our next lab, lab number 3, will go over the admin server. So stay tuned.